Welcome back to the Justin Prince Show. I am so fired up for you to meet my guest today, Chris Widener. You know, it's so interesting. You have these stories of people that help you stay in the game. You know, you hear their message, you read their book, you listen to their audio, and it helps you stay in the game, keeps you going. And those people like are anchors for you. Like you look back later and you're like, man, that was like an anchor point. If I wouldn't have heard what you had to say, your life, affected me. There's an old Christian hymn that says, each life that touches ours for good. And Chris and I are meeting right now for the first time, meaning this dialogue. We've gone back and forth on social, but this dialogue's our first time. And Chris, your life has been a life that touched me for good. Like I'm a better person because of the work that you've chosen to do with your life. So I'm just like so honored that you're here with me, but I'm really excited to share you with people that haven't yet had a chance to meet you. And, I know you have a new book coming out where I'm really excited to dive into. So just thanks so much, man. This is a real honor for me to have you on.
Awesome. I appreciate you having me on. You know, you were telling me the story about how we first got connected at the Jim Rohn Weekend Leadership Event in 2004. And as you were just saying what you were saying, I heard Jim's voice. You remember Jim always used to talk about when your name is in someone else's testimony.
Yes.
And that's just a beautiful thing. It's a great reminder of Jim and how he's impacted your life, how he impacted my life, impacted the lives of millions of people. So that's neat. I appreciate hearing that. I'm kind of tearing up a little bit already.
No, I love it, man.
No, it's great.
Jim Rohn's, his impact on my life, one of his philosophies that his dad taught him was to always do more than you're paid for as an investment in your future. Like I built my whole life on that. One of his was life's not about what you get, it's about who you become in the process. I built my entire career on these philosophies.
Yeah.
And as I look back now, I'm like, they literally helped to shape or to mold, the way I looked at things. So I want to dive into this. Let's go back to this 2004. You were 38 years old. You were speaking with, we were kind of joking, like the legit OGs, Dennis Waitley, Brian Tracy, Jim, Charlie Tremendous Jones. Man, there was some. It was a powerhouse weekend.
Jerry Clark was there. Remember Jerry Clark?
Yeah,
Jerry Clark was there. We had a whole bunch
too.
of. The down speaker roster was great, even though they weren't as famous as the others. It was great.
Yes. You shared a story about David, and you've actually written an entire book about this, but about Michelangelo's David. So that you guys, the famous sculpture, right?
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing that story with us? I think it's such a beautiful story.
Sure.
And I felt like I remember I didn't know you at the time, right? I didn't know you when I first heard this weekend seminar, and so for you to get on that stage as a 38-year-old young man at the time and just hang with these legends, hang with these legends was pretty special. And part of it was that story of David. Share that with the audience real quick.
Sure. Yeah. I draw parallels between the creation of the statue of David and the real David in the Bible. And what happened was Michelangelo wanted to go into art. And his dad didn't want him to go into art because back then artists were not considered, they were not considered highbrow. And in Florence, Italy, in the early 1500s, it was the birth of citizen legislatures. So everybody wanted to go become a politician. Well, he decided I wasn't going to go and do my political thing. I'm going to go, and I think he left home at 14, went to somebody who was sort of his benefactor, and he became arguably the greatest artist of all time. And he created the David. So so basically the book is about following your dreams, not the dreams necessarily of your father or people who know what you're supposed to go and do. The translation into the real life David in the Bible is, if you remember the story, Samuel was told to go and find the next king of Israel. And Samuel was told to go to a guy named Jesse's house. So he shows up at Jesse's house and he says, hey, the next king of Israel is one of your sons. Why don't you bring him out here and God will tell me which one to pick, and away we go. So he lines up all these boys, and Samuel goes, well, it's not this one, it's not this one, it's not this one, it's not this one. And he looks at Jesse and goes, are these all your boys? And Jesse goes, well, I got this young kid, he's the youngest. He was young, he was like 14 or something like that. And Samuel says, bring him here. And so anyway, he brings him there, and Samuel says, this is the king. Well, the brothers were like, what? And the dad was, I think, embarrassed. He wanted to be somebody else. And Samuel said to Jesse, remember this, man looks on the outside, God looks on the inside. Now, back to the statue of the David. That big piece of marble, it was a huge piece of marble. It had been laying in a warehouse or a workshop in Florence, Italy, since before Michelangelo was born. But it was very thinly cut, and it had been introduced to a couple of other artists who had been given commissions on it, but nobody ever put a chisel to the marble because they thought when they did, the whole thing would break. And so they were looking at the outside of the marble. Along comes Michelangelo. He comes in, and as the story goes, the name of the book is called The Angel Inside. And as the story goes, as he was working on that piece of marble, a little boy came up to Michelangelo and said, "Why are you hitting that rock?" And he said, "There's an angel inside, and I'm setting it free." Every other artist looked at the outside of the marble. Michelangelo looked inside the marble and saw what would become one of the greatest statues of human history. Same thing then with the real life David. God, the mans were like, "Well, he's just a little scrawny little sheep herder." God said, "No, he's a mighty king of Israel." So the whole idea is don't let anybody look at this. There's tall successful people, short successful people, fat successful people, white successful people, black successful people. Success and life isn't dependent upon what you look like or what your history is. There's people that were born poorer than dirt who became successful. And there's people that were born super rich who failed. It's all about what God's doing in our life and the creation that we are inside, that God has made us. And, I always look at David. David was on one hand this powerful warrior. He killed Goliath, with one stone. He didn't even need the other four that he picked up. He just won right in the forehead, but he also played the harp. And I always think that's really interesting, particularly for men. He had a side of beauty and he had a side of power. In fact, the original subtitle of the book before I sold it to Random House was Creating a Life of Power and Beauty. That was the original subtitle. And I think it's really important for us, particularly as men, to understand that we are not just all powerful, rough and rugged, but we're also the kind of man, a real man can pick up a baby and, touch its nose and be kind and soft and warm with our wives and our children and all those kinds of things. I thought it was a great lesson just for men to have that breadth of character, to be able to be a man in our fullness.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, I call it steel and velvet. This is true for all leaders, right?
Yes.
Male and female. It's like, can you be steel and velvet where you're strong, you have a backbone, you can make decisions and you can lead out even in tough times.
Yep.
But then also you have velvet where you know when to be compassionate and be empathetic and to listen and to learn and to be quiet and to to really pause and slow down. Covey talks about being fast with systems but slow with people.
Yeah.
And be a lot of velvet. And that is that power and that beauty. You love the beauty of life and love the beauty of people, but you also have enough strength to not get pushed around and not let people bully you.
Yeah.
Jim stands up at the end of this seminar. Anyone that's heard my story has probably heard me share this before. Stands up at the end of this 2004 seminar. And Chris, by the way, Chris emceed the entire weekend, so he was in and out, telling these different stories. Just did truly a masterful job. And Jim Rohn stands up after all of these incredible speakers have spoken, and he says, "We now have enough testimonials and enough personal experiences to conclude that it's possible."
Yeah.
And as you're listening to this, I want to encourage you to remember that it's possible. Like your dreams and your goals are possible. And Jim Rohn says that it's possible to create and to design an extraordinary life. And Chris, I remember hearing that. I'm driving my white Toyota Corolla, 250,000 miles. My first business has just failed. I'm living in the loft of my wife's parents' garage. I got two little babies sleeping in the closet. I'm below zero financially, back on credit cards, back on taxes. I have two part-time jobs. One I do on the weekdays, one I do on the weekends. I'm kissing my little babies when they're asleep in the closet in the morning. And I get home late at night and kiss them on the cheek when they're asleep at night. I'm just kind of in that grind. And I'm hearing you and these other speakers basically sharing from your own testimonial and your own personal experiences that your success was possible. And I remember thinking to myself, I knew it was possible for you and for Jim and for Dennis and Brian. I just didn't know if it was going to be possible for me. And odds are, my friends, right now, some of you are driving or, at the gym or whatever, listening to this, and you're asking yourself kind of a similar question of like, it's possible for you guys, is it possible for me? And here's what's interesting. Now here I am, let's call it 19, 18, 20 years later kind of thing. And from my own testimonial and from my own personal experience, I get to remind all of you that your dreams and your goals are possible, and it is possible for you to create and to design an extraordinary life. And one of the ways you get there is by listening to those who believe in you and listening to those who tell you that you can. And Dennis, to me, you were one of those people that I chose to kind of just listen to, meaning I gave more weight to your words saying, hey, it's possible. Hey, you got it. Hey, there's something inside of you. I gave more weight to those words than the words of someone saying you can't do it,
Yeah.
Uh, from your success journey, how did you get connected into this world of, becoming true, personal development of writing? Where did that all start for you?
Well, it started, I started telling my story right out of college. I was a pastor from 88 to 2002, but I started telling my story because I had a crazy upbringing, 28 homes, 11 different schools, shipped off to live with relatives twice, started drugs in the sixth grade, started opium in the eighth grade, made my money betting the horses at Long Acres Horse Track, which used to be a track in Seattle. It's long gone now. Definitely going in the wrong direction. Became a Christian summer before my senior year of college, high school, went to Bible college, and then got out and I became a pastor. And I remember Deepak Chopra wrote a book called The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success. And somebody gave it to me and said, hey, would you read this and tell me what you think? And I said, sure. And one of the very first things I read was, you are God. And I went, I'm not God. The world would be a really horrible place if I was God. Like, it would be a total mess if I was God. But I remembered thinking, why don't Christians teach success principles? Because the Bible's the greatest success principle book of all time. Like, everything you need for life and godliness is in the Bible. And, and it's got all these stories of success and failure and God's involvement in man and da-da-da. So I thought, I'm going to start talking about success principles from a Christian perspective. You're not God, but God wants to help you. Not the message of Deepak Chopra, which is you are God. And so I ended up sort of getting into that world. And here's a funny story. I knew John Maxwell before he left the pastorate. In fact, I took a graduate level course on leadership from him while he was still a pastor in San Diego at Skyline Wesleyan. So in 2002, I felt like God wanted me to go and write and speak full time, at which point I resigned my church. And one of the first calls I got was from John Maxwell to ghostwrite for him. So I wrote his nationally syndicated column for a couple of years. Then Jim Rohn called and said, hey, would you come and write for us? I said, as long as my name can go on it. And we ended up writing his book, which sold over 1 million copies, 12 Pillars. And then I had built a business selling audio programs through Costco and Sam's Club. We were putting 15 CDs and DVDs together under themes: leadership, sales success. We were selling 50 to 75,000 boxes a month through Costco. Well, Zig Ziglar was on the cover of every one of my boxes. And so I got to know Zig by writing him big fat checks once a quarter. And then I had been doing a TV show down in Dallas, and they asked Zig to do a TV show. I didn't know it at the time, but Tom, his son, who I'm still good friends with, Tom said, would you be willing to co-host Zig's TV show? And I said, sign me up, right? I remember the first time I ever walked into the studio, I had never met Zig before. And I remember telling people, I still tell people, I felt like a priest who'd been called to the Vatican to serve communion with the Pope. Like, I walked in and there's Zig Ziglar, and Zig was so gracious, so kind, became a great mentor to me. So in 7 years, from 2002 to 2009, I worked with John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar, and Jim Rohn. And it was just such a God thing, because when I left being a pastor, just following what God told me to do, I had no idea that this was what was in line for me for the next 7 years. And it was a great boost to my career, but it was just great to be mentored by some of those folks.
Oh my gosh.
A couple months ago, I was down at an event where John was at, and we bumped into each other and had a great talk. And, right after I resigned my church, June 1st, 2002, I put on an event. September 26th, 2002, I put on an event. I mortgaged my house. And I told John never knew this story. I told him a couple months ago when I was in Florida, I said, did you ever know the backstory to that? And he goes, no. And I said, well, my house was worth $300,000. I took out a $100,000 mortgage on it, and I gave 55 of it to you. to show up and speak at my event. He goes, I never knew that. You mortgaged your house to pay my speaking fee. I said, absolutely. Mortgaged my house to pay your speaking fee. And of course, God used that to do what he did. So,
Unbelievable.
yeah.
That is incredible. So I don't know if I shared this with you. So John did the forward for my book.
Oh, he did? I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I've had, we actually published it through Maxwell Leadership.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They're publishing. And so, uh, yeah, he's made a huge impact in my
Fantastic
life.
guy,
And
yeah.
one thing about John that I love, and I never got time with Zig Ziglar or Jim Rohn, but one thing about John that I love is behind the scenes, John's, I would even say, better than you would hope he would be.
Yeah.
He really, his desire to add value to people, his desire to be
Yeah.
to serve people and to be a leader and to have insightful things. He's just a real special guy. He and my
Yeah.
son, Isaac, have had some really, really sweet, touching moments together.
Yeah.
John's a special, special man.
Yeah. He is.
So you and I share a passion about our country and, capitalism, our love for the nation, and I'm building my business, and I felt like one of the reasons I decided to build my business and build a community and of people was to create a value and principle based leadership revolution, where I feel like our country just needs a revival as of sorts when it comes to values and principle based leadership. I felt like by creating a community of people, you could have just that much more impact
Sure.
in people's lives, and individually and in their homes and their local communities and ultimately in the country and maybe even ultimately in the world. So you wrote a book called Coming American Revival.
Yep.
I'd love to hear, what does that term mean to you, Coming American Revival?
Yep.
Just kind of start dissecting, and let's dive into where your passion for this revival concept came from.
Well, as a pastor, I've always liked revival. Revival means revive, means the Latin for viva, viva Las Vegas or viva la Risión or whatever. It's live, right? It's life. And so means again. So revival means to come to life again. And so it always starts with the church. And I really believe that the church needs to be revived in order for America to be revived. And so I was writing my 25th book, a book called The Capitalist. And and actually Maxwell Publishing wants to do that book when I finally get around to it. But in the middle of writing that book, I felt like God said, I want you to write a book called The Coming American Revival. Okay, I'll write a book on revival. Then I started doing my research. There has not been a significant book on the topic of revival since the 1950s, when a guy named Leonard Ravenhill wrote a book called Why Revival Tarries, or why does it wait? Why does it not come? Why is it delayed? And there's not been a significant revival in America since the early 1970s, which was made popular in the movie The Jesus Revolution a year or so ago, when the Jesus People movement happened, and it ended up sort of creating the Calvary Chapel movement, the Calvary Chapel Church, and all those kinds of things. And so I wrote a book on revival, why we need revival, what revival looks like, what it would look like, what it takes to have happen a revival of Christianity in America. Because frankly, there's a lot going on in the church, but I don't think there's a lot of impact. There's a lot of busyness. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of whoop-de-doo, a lot of dog and pony shows. There's a lot of stuff going on. But just because there's a lot of activity doesn't mean that there's a lot of power. And so I set the capitalists aside. I wrote the book, The Coming American Revival. And much like when I told you when I left being a pastor, I didn't know that I was going to end up working with these guys in the next 7 years. Well, the same thing. I by obedience, I started writing the book, and out of the blue, I ended up being introduced to 3 different people who ended up endorsing the book, who I didn't even know when I started writing the book. So one is Senator Tim Scott. He's the cover endorsement from South Carolina. He was being considered for vice president for Trump in the re-election. And then John Rich, the country singer. I was introduced to John. He endorsed the book. Kirk Cameron, the actor, he endorsed the book. So I ended up getting introduced to admirals and professional baseball players. And it's been really neat because I only have 2 pastors who endorsed the book. The rest is successful business people from across the all sorts of industries. And it was a sign to me, and that this is really what God wanted wanted me to do. And then I just talk to people all the time who say, even people who are very involved in politics, and I'm about as involved in politics as you can possibly get. I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2010. I put on a series of political events a couple of years ago. We had 7 events, 45,000 people in attendance at those events. Like, I'm very, very involved. But here's one thing I don't believe. I don't believe that a president is going to save our country. I think a president can do a lot towards creating conditions that will help save a country. But really what I believe will save a country is God. And, there's a reason we say one nation under God. We don't say one nation under the Democrat Party or under the Republican Party or under, a really strong, powerful political leader. We say one nation under God. And so the idea is let's pick the right president, go vote. We're stewards. We're given that option. It's a great freedom. And I really believe God expects us to take advantage of the freedoms he's given us and to be stewards of our country. But ultimately, the real power in saving our country and making sure that it gets back to what it once was is prayer and God and revival and seeing Christian people come to life again. That revival. And so that's what it's about. It's a challenge to the church to get its act together and to do what it's supposed to do.
As I look at trend rates for church attendance, this is true both in the States and it's true globally as well. The trend rates are like going the wrong direction, right? So like the younger generation is basically either not interested or finding God and doing something else, right? And not in the church. Are you seeing similar trend rates? What are you attributing it to, and what do you feel like are some of the things that could help to turn that around? Because as you know, going to church is not just about the sermon. You know what I'm saying? Like, going to church builds local community. There's people go meet and build local, fellowship and community. Going to church allows you to go serve other people. I think a lot of us go and like, dude, I didn't get anything out of it. It's like, yo, did you go and give anything to it? Like, did you go and serve or add value or be a support to someone else or even to the overall environment of the church? I mean, did you set up some chairs? Did you vacuum? Did you support it at all?
Yeah.
So I want to hear kind of your thoughts on that. As you're seeing church attendance decreasing, how do you think that turns around?
Well, I think there's a few things happening. There's a number of different kinds of churches when we're talking about a building with the word church in front of it. First of all, I think you have an entire swath of so-called churches that are not even churches anymore. They have abandoned the word of God. The Bible calls it apostasy. They've gone away. They still own the building. It still says church in the front, but there's nothing churchy going on in there. There's no relationship with God. There's no preaching of the gospel. They tell the Bible doesn't matter anymore. That. You got that. Then you have, I think, the fearful churches. They're afraid to tell the truth. And so they just kind of plod along. Then I think you have churches are what I call dog and pony show churches, which means it's all about the show. Just come and watch. Be an attendee. Come and watch. We'll have 3 good songs, a 25-minute sermon. Everything is formatted, and there's no room for the power of God to move and to touch people's heart. Why are people not going to church anymore? Because there's no answer for them there. When I look at one of the Bible verses has been in my mind for just 6 months now, and I can't get it out of my mind. Matthew 9:36, where it says, Jesus came into Jerusalem and he looked at the crowds and he had compassion on them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And that has driven me for the last 6 months. How do I see people with compassion? So when I look out at a congregation, or when a pastor looks out at a congregation, you need to realize these are people with marriage problems, money problems, drug problems, suicidal thoughts, work problems, all of this stuff. And they've got 1 hour or an hour and a half to come, and they're saying, I need God. I need a touch from God. I need something for me. I'm drowning here. And we do a dog and pony show for them and send them back out and say, see you next Sunday. By the way, drop something in the offering plate. So I think what's really going to turn, I'll give you an example. I went to a Bible college that basically ended up, with all the new professors coming in, they basically ended up telling you the Bible didn't really mean anything. The whole Bible college went woke. It doesn't even exist anymore. Well, as an alumni, I got there as the tail end of the professors were still Bible believing, and then they had all the new professors that came in and said, well, the Bible doesn't really mean that. Well, as an alumni, they wrote and they said, why do you think our attendance is dropping? And I said, why would anybody pay $10,000 a year to come study a book that you're going to tell them doesn't matter? That's why your attendance is, the reason they come is to hear how God and the Bible will influence their life and impact their life and give them the power to live their life. And so I think when we get back to that, that's the only thing that's the only thing that will compete with the world. Your singer at church is never going to compete to the guy that's filling out a stadium. He's just never going to do it. So why do we compete on that? When I was a youth minister, my first job was in northern New Jersey in one of the wealthiest communities in the country. And I mean, our church was a who's who of American business people. And I remember God said to me, you are never going to compete with these teenagers with what they get every single weekend. They'd fly to their vacation home in the Bahamas for the weekend. They were seeing every major concert, front row, $200 tickets. And I realized I cannot compete with them with some sort of a, bobbing for apples kind of thing at youth group. So I taught the Bible to these kids. And we went from 6 kids to 200 kids in that youth group because I was competing with them. I was competing with the world in something the world can't compete with me.
Yeah.
Power for living. If I'd have done, hey, let's bring in a Christian singer and let's do this and let's do that, they'd have went, well, it's not as good as Billy Joel was last week in the garden, right? And so I think the church needs to get back to church business, which is helping people see how God can transform their lives. And I will say this, I will agree that people are talking about this younger generation, but I don't know if you're watching what's going on with this younger generation. I think this is going to be led by the younger generation. The Passion conferences, I don't know if you've heard about those.
No.
Oh, look up Passion conferences in Atlanta. They're filling out where that big basketball arena with 20,000 college kids. Lee University, just up the road from me in Cleveland, Tennessee. I'm in Chattanooga. They had a revival about a year and a half ago. Tucker Carlson covered it on his show like 2 or 3 times. And these kids went in for chapel one day, didn't leave for 2 weeks. Like revival hit. And then I just was seeing videos yesterday of an event that took place at Texas A&M University last weekend where like 20,000 kids came together. Colleges are, because if you think about it, these are the kids that are being told your life doesn't have any meaning, you're being oppressed, you're a victim. Well, who wants to live their life as an oppressed victim?
Yeah.
And now they're hearing this message. God loves you. God has a plan for your life. God wants to save you. God has a mission for you. You were created with a purpose. While you were still in your mother's womb, he knit you together. He knew your name. He knew your days of your life. And all of a sudden, bam, there's purpose for these kids. And I think we're going to see an amazing revival amongst college students.
Yeah, so that purpose, another way to think about that, or another way I process it is identity, right? It's like when you realize that in this case, you're a child of God, that your life has value and purpose and meaning. You're not an accident. You were born to do something significant with your life. You were born to be a winner. You walk with a different pep in your step with that level of identity than, to your point, I'm a victim and I'm oppressed and I'm being taken advantage of.
And you hit the nail on the head when you said our identity, and then you immediately attached it to child of God.
Yes.
Child of God. That's our identity. How would life be different for us if we walked around? Look, if I was the son of a king, I'd walk around like I was a prince. Well, we're sons and daughters of the King of Kings. Yeah. We're heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, right? And so what would happen if we began to see it that way? I preached in a church this last Sunday, little church here in the greater Chattanooga area. And one of the Bible passages I talked about was how great is the love. This is 1 John chapter 3, verse 1, I think. How great is the love the Father has lavished on us that we would be called children of God. And I love that word. I've actually thought about writing a book. It's in my prayer part up here. Someday I want to write a book called Lavished, because, and I walked around to the congregation like I had a little spoon and I said, God doesn't say, here's a little bit of love for you. Here's a little bit of love for you. Oh, here's a little bit of love for you. No, God lavishes us. Like we've all been to a wedding where you show up and it's like more of a poor family and you've got like burgers and pork sandwiches and things like that. And like it's kind of very constrained. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's your income, nothing wrong with that. But we've also been to that wedding where it was like, holy cow, look at this setup, right? Look at all this food. Like this is a spread. Translate that to God's love. God lavishes. It's here's my love and here's some more. And you've got enough? No, here's even more. That's what a relationship with God is like. When you're a child, when you're a child of God, we are lavished upon. The other illustration I used, I said, when you get invited to a friend's child's 12th birthday party, what do you buy them? You buy them a $30, $40, $50 gift.
Yeah.
When it's your kid's birthday party, you buy that kid a lot of gifts, right? Because it's your child. You lavish upon him. And so that's what we need to get back to is just this relationship with God that is a father-son, father-daughter relationship. And what comes out of that. One of my favorite passages is from the book of Hebrews where it says, because God knows what life is like for us and he's been tempted in every way, it says, therefore, you can come boldly before the throne of grace. And I always, whenever I talk about that or think about that verse, I think about a giant chamber. Like, I don't know if you saw Game of Thrones, but remember the throne room in Game of Thrones? There was that big throne up in the front. And most people, if you were going to visit the king, you would come like this. You would come like this.
Yeah, of course.
King, would you please consider my, but the son of the king comes walking in with his head held high. And he comes boldly before the throne of grace. Dad. And he asks his dad for it. That's the relationship we have when we're children of God. We can come boldly with our head held high, asking because we have that relationship with God. And I just think a lot of people don't understand who we are. I love that you brought up that word identity because that is what it really all comes down to.
Yes. Let me hit you with this. So I had a partner of mine that shared this with me. I want to tie it to this idea of of God's love for us, but then also like of our motivation. Because one of the things I think about with, why do you do what you do, right? So he called it the ladder of motivation. I'll kind of walk you through this very quickly.
Yeah.
But he says the lowest level would be like fear. Like, for example, I'm gonna start a business, or I'm gonna work hard at my job because of my fear of not paying the bills, right?
Yeah.
2 would be for money. I'm gonna do what I do so I can make some money. 3 would be for revenge. Revenge would be you did me wrong. It's an ex-wife, ex-husband. It's a former business partner that did you wrong. The next would be like a competitive ego. I'm competitive and I'm driven. Next would be like I like to learn new skills. I'm doing what I do because I'm learning new skills. I'm getting better at it. Next would be personal development. I'm growing as a person. That's why I wake up early, stay up late. Next would be self-mastery. Like I'm really like polishing this thing and getting great at it. Next would be gratitude. I do it because I've been so blessed. I'm grateful. So I go back and I do it to serve others. Next would be like making a difference. I do it to make a difference in people's lives. The highest form though, is I do it because of love.
Mm.
And if you do something because of love, even when you have tons of money or success, you still do it. Why? Because you love people and you love to serve and you love to add value. In other words, now that you have the money, you don't just sit on your couch and chill out or go on a yacht forever. Like, some of these people you talked about, Jim, John, Maxwell, Zig, they served and taught and wrote and inspired until their last breath. John's still with us, fortunately. But why were they doing that? It's because at this point, you just love people.
They
And
didn't
in their
need the
case,
money
you love
anymore.
God's
They didn't
children.
need the fame anymore.
Yeah.
They did it because they love people.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you tie that to this idea? Like, as we talk about this next generation, and again, all of us too, you talk about God's love for us, but one of the things I think we can do, there's those famous Bible verse that says, Jesus says, greater love has no man than this, than a man would lay down his life for his friend. I used to think of that as like, Chris, you're in the street and the car's coming speeding and I would push you out of the way and dive and I'll take the hit. Or there's a speeding bullet coming and I'll push you out of the way and I'll take the bullet because I'll lay down my life for you. I think laying down your life doesn't have to be that dramatic. It's like, it's the life I could have lived, I'm laying down to go serve and add value to people, right? the life I could have lived. I could be doing this with my life, but I decided to do this because, because I love people,
Yeah.
because I love God. How does that ladder of motivation hit you? How do you process
Well,
that?
I think it's absolutely true. And I think that love is the driving force of why we should be living our Christian life. I heard an amazing story the other day. You know Penn and Teller, the magicians,
Mhm.
right? And I think Penn is the tall one who talks, and Teller's the one who doesn't, which is
Yes.
kind of funny because he's not telling anybody anything. But I read an interview with Penn. Penn is a renowned atheist. He's always been an atheist. But he's a nice guy. He's not one of these angry atheists who, oh, you and your little sky fairy god. Like, he doesn't mock Christians. But he said something really interesting in this interview. He said, "Do you know what people I disrespect the most?" And they said, "Who?" And he said, "Christians who don't witness to me." And the guy said, well, why? And he said, "Think about it. If you honestly believe that I'm going to die and go to hell, a fiery furnace of hell, if you really believe that, if you don't tell me, it means you don't either, one, you don't really believe it, or number two, you don't love me enough to tell me." And I thought, what an insight from somebody. He actually wants Christians to witness to him because that's how he determines whether they're actually true Christians or not. Is because if you really loved me, you would tell me the gospel. I'm going to reject it because I'm an atheist, but at least it shows me that you care about me.
Yeah.
Another person that popped into my mind, I don't know if you remember the name, Charles Colson, but Charles Colson his nickname was the Hatchet Man. He was one of the few people that went to prison over the Watergate scandal.
Mm.
A very, 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 very well-known political guy, and he was called the Hatchet Man. He actually said, "I would crawl over my own grandmother to get Richard Nixon elected." That was a famous quote of his. He was very, very. He went to prison. And he was born again in prison. He came out, he wrote a book called Born Again, which sold millions of copies, and he dedicated the rest of his life to a thing that he started called Prison Fellowship. When he died, he set his salary at $100,000 a year. He donated every dollar he made off of his books back to the ministry. And I think by the time he died, he was making like $107,000 a year. This is a guy who could have made millions as a consultant every single year. But he dedicated his life to helping start prison fellowship chapters in over 100 countries. And what he could have done versus what he did. And he did it because when he went to prison, he fell in love with prisoners. And he led an amazing, amazing, amazing life until he finally passed away.
I love that. So the coming American revival, to me, it's like, and this idea that we need, so good. It's not one nation under the Democrats or under the Republicans, or under, to your point, a really charismatic political leader. One of the things about the U.S. system is every 4 years we have a new CEO running the ship. Now maybe it's 8 years, but the point is it churns every 4 years.
Yep.
And so to truly be one nation under God and to build faith back into the country, into the conversation, build prayer back into the country and back into the conversation. I mean, I don't know if there's a more important subject, for people to be discussing. So
there really
I know
isn't.
they can go to comingamericanrevival.com to get the book, but then also, wherever their favorite books are sold, Amazon or wherever you want to go get them. But if someone's like on the teeter right there of like, I what should I expect from the book, and what am I going to learn, and why should I maybe get one for a friend of mine? What would be kind of your
I'll
last
tell you who you
thought?
should buy one for. Buy one for your pastor. Buy 2 copies and give one to your pastor. Ask him to read it and then go to lunch with you. Like that's the strategy. You buy 2, give one to your pastor and say, "Hey, can I take you to lunch and talk about this book a month from now?" So the book is, I created, I'm really actually proud of the book, and God really led me to do it. So it talks about talks about the current spiritual state of a weak church. We're a weak church, which is evidenced by all the things we've talked about today. It talks about what revival would look like. What would happen? There's a chapter on family. There's a chapter on education. There's a chapter on government. What would happen if every politician told the truth to us? If they were so convicted by Christianity and the truth and they only told us the truth, how would that change American politics? How would it change the educational system? How would it change your family? All these different kinds of things. I talk about how we get revival, which basically is an analysis of 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. It's the most famous passage in the Bible in regard to revival. It was right after the temple had been built by Solomon. And God says to him, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and heal their land. Revival is an if-then. God always wants revival. God wants to pour out his Spirit on us. He wants us to enjoy life. He wants to bless us. He wants us to have, to be children of the King. But if we're out of whack, he lets us be out of whack. And so it's an if-then. If my people are called by my name, three things: humble themselves, pray, seek my face, turn from the wicked ways. Four things. Then will I heal their land. In Revelation, there's a similar sort of if-then, and it's Jesus talking to the church, the end times church, and he says, behold, I stand at the door and knock.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone would open the door, then I will come in and eat with him and he with me. See that if then to the Israelites in the Old Testament, if then to the Christians in the New Testament, it's conditional. God says, I'm ready. I want to bless your socks off. But we have to get right. And that's the call of the book. Will we humble ourselves? Will we pray? Will we seek his face? And frankly, will we turn from our wicked ways? Because, Justin, I think if you take the average Christian in America, take away Sunday morning, take away Wednesday night, and just compare us the rest of the week against the average non-Christian, there's not a lot of difference. The biggest difference between Christians and non-Christians in America today is Christians spend their Sunday mornings and their Wednesday nights at church. Other than that, the way they do business, the way they treat their wives, the way they love others, there's not a lot of difference. We need to be those kinds of people who are so transformed by God that other people look at us and say, there's something different about this guy.
Yeah. Chris, listen, man, it's such an honor to have this conversation. I can't wait till we meet, hopefully here sooner and later.
I know. I'm thrilled that we were able to do this, and thrilled to be able to talk to you. And it's amazing to hear
each life that touches ours for good. Your life and the work that you chose to do has been work that has added value to me, kept me in the game, and kept me believing it was possible for me. And I love to have kind of a deeper discussion, not just success principles, but in this case about about faith, about God, about the love we have for our country and the desire we have for our country to basically get back on track and get back on and stay on track. So it's the last great hope in the world, my friends. If this experiment fails, this experiment with democracy, if this one fails, this is the last bastion of light and hope in the world.
It's why they're having Trump rallies they're having them all over the world. Like the rest of the world knows, as America goes, so goes the rest of the world.
Yes. Because
with all of our warts and with all of our problems and with all of our failures, America has been a blessing to the world.
No question.
And it is because God blessed us. The orphanages we've done, the schools we've done, the food we've sent, the foreign aid we've sent, whether it's through churches or through the government, we've been a blessing to the world. And I believe that God set us up that way. It's why he gave us this piece of land and said, I'm going to bless you and you're going to bless others.
Yes. Love that. Well, Chris, you're listen, man, you got a friend in me,
Awesome.
You got
I'm
an
glad.
ally and a friend in me, because you've been a support to me, from afar for many years. So my friends, go get the book, Coming American Revival. It's a book you not only want to get for yourself, but share with others. And let's see if we can make a difference both in our country and in people's hearts, in the human heart, and change their faith. It ultimately all starts, as you guys know, it's kind of the Gandhi concept. It's like, be the change you wish to see. It starts in your heart, then in your family, strengthening your own home, and then in your local community, and then in your ultimately the country and around the world. So if we're going to do some good, it starts with you and I taking action. So
that actually reminded me. Let me tell you one more thing about the book. At the end of the book, I did a 31-day devotional. The first 10 days are about personal revival. The second 10 days are about church revival. And the third 10 days are about the national revival. And the reason why I did that is exactly what you just said. It starts with the individual. and a bunch of individuals at a church get revived. Now the church gets revived. Now a bunch of churches get revived. Now the nation gets revived. Always starts with our own hearts.
Yes.
You positioned it perfectly.
Well, thank you again for jumping in, and go to comingamericanrevival.com. And Chris, man, what an honor to be on with
Thanks,
you, bro.
brother. I
Appreciate you doing it.
appreciate you.